Why did a quiet child refuse to sit? And what did the teacher discover that left her in tears? This is a story that will shake you to your core, a reminder that sometimes the smallest behaviors hide the deepest pain. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy educational stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Jefferson Elementary School in Bradford, Massachusetts. It was a small-town school, the kind where everyone knew everyone, where teachers had taught multiple generations of the same families, where the annual fall festival was the biggest event of the year. Miss Sarah Harper had been teaching second grade here for 11 years, and she thought she'd seen everything. She was wrong. Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah arranged the books on her desk, wrote the date on the whiteboard, and greeted each child as they entered her classroom. 23 familiar faces, and one new one. Ethan Miller had joined her class just 3 days ago, transferred in from another district. He was small for 7 years old, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and a quiet demeanor that made him almost invisible among the more boisterous children. "Good morning, Ethan," Sarah said warmly as he shuffled past her desk. "Morning," he mumbled, barely making eye contact. She'd noticed his shyness from day one, but that wasn't unusual for new students. What was unusual, she was about to discover, was something else entirely. At 9:15, Sarah gathered the children for story time. This was the highlight of their morning routine, the moment when 23 second graders would settle onto the rainbow carpet in the reading corner, their eyes wide with anticipation. They'd been reading The Brave Little Mouse all week, and today was the day they'd finally discover if Timothy would make it home safely. "All right, everyone, let's circle up for story time," Sarah announced, holding up the book. The children scrambled to the carpet, jostling for the best spots, giggling and whispering. Sarah counted heads as they settled down. 22 children sat cross-legged on the carpet, their faces turned toward her expectantly. But one child remained standing near the back of the group. Ethan stood completely still, his arms wrapped around himself, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Ethan, sweetie, come join us on the carpet," Sarah said, her voice gentle and encouraging. The boy didn't move. His fingers gripped the sides of his oversized navy blue sweatshirt, pulling it down repeatedly, as if trying to stretch it longer. "Ethan," Sarah tried again, "there's a perfect spot right here next to Marcus." Marcus Thompson, a friendly boy with a bright smile, patted the carpet enthusiastically. "Yeah, come sit here, Ethan. You can see really good from this spot." But Ethan remained frozen in place. His breathing looked shallow, controlled. Sarah noticed the way his jaw was clenched, the way his small body seemed to vibrate with tension. "I'm okay standing, Miss Harper," Ethan said quietly, his voice so soft she almost didn't hear him. "But you'll be more comfortable sitting with everyone else," Sarah pressed gently, "and you'll be able to see the pictures better." "I can see fine from here," Ethan insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Several children turned to stare at him. Emma Rodriguez whispered something to the girl next to her. Tyler Chen giggled. Sarah felt her stomach tighten with concern, but she didn't want to embarrass the boy, especially not during his first week. "All right," she said with a smile, though her mind was already working through possible explanations. "If you change your mind, you're always welcome to join us." She began reading, throwing herself into the voices of the different characters, making the children laugh at the silly parts and gasp at the scary moments. But throughout the entire story, her awareness kept drifting back to Ethan, standing motionless behind the group, his face expressionless, his body rigid. When story time ended 30 minutes later and the children returned to their desks for math worksheets, Sarah watched Ethan carefully. While the other 22 children settled into their chairs, pulling out pencils and opening their workbooks, Ethan approached his desk and just stood there. He positioned himself beside his chair, leaning his hip against the desk, and opened his workbook at an awkward angle. His left hand held the page flat, while his right hand gripped his pencil. He began working on the problems, standing upright. His body weight shifted entirely to his legs. Sarah moved through the classroom, checking on different students, answering questions, offering encouragement. When she reached Ethan's desk, she crouched down beside him. "Ethan, honey, why don't you sit down? You're going to get tired standing like that." His pencil froze mid-number. His eyes flickered toward her, then darted away just as quickly. In that brief moment of eye contact, Sarah saw something that sent a chill down her spine. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't stubbornness. It was fear, pure and visceral. "I like standing when I do math," he said, the words coming out too quickly, too rehearsed. "My old teacher let me stand. It helps me concentrate." Sarah straightened up, studying his face. He wouldn't look at her. His knuckles had gone white around the pencil. A small muscle in his jaw twitched. "Did your old teacher really let you stand?" she asked softly. "Yes," he said immediately. Then quieter. "Sometimes." She wanted to push further, but Tyler was calling her name from across the room, stuck on a word problem. She gave Ethan's shoulder a gentle squeeze and felt him flinch violently at the contact. "Sorry," he gasped, jerking away. "No, I'm sorry," Sarah said quickly. "I didn't mean to startle you." But his reaction had been more than startlement. It had been pain. She was certain of it. The morning dragged on, and with each passing hour, Sarah's concern deepened. During writing time, Ethan stood at his desk. During science, when they gathered around the lab table to observe the bean plants they were growing, Ethan stood at the back of the group. During music class, when the children sat in rows on the floor, Ethan stood against the wall. Mrs. Chen, the music teacher, tried to get him to sit. "Ethan, you need to sit with the others. Those are the rules." "Please," Ethan said, and there was something in his voice that made Mrs. Chen pause. "Please, I can't." "You can't or you won't?" Mrs. Chen asked, her tone sharpening. "I can't," he whispered. Mrs. Chen looked at Sarah, who stood in the doorway. Sarah shook her head slightly and mouthed, "Let him stand." Mrs. Chen frowned but nodded. At lunchtime, Sarah walked her class to the cafeteria and watched as they scattered to their usual tables. Ethan collected his lunch tray, a slice of pizza, an apple, and a carton of milk, and approached a table where several classmates sat. But he didn't sit down. He stood at the end of the table, his tray balanced in his hands. "Yo, Ethan, why are you standing?" asked James Parker, a loud boy who always spoke before thinking. "That's weird, man." "Maybe he has ants in his pants," shouted Michael Davis, and several children laughed. "Leave him alone," said Lily Chen, Mrs. Chen's daughter, and the kindest child in the class. "Maybe he hurt himself or something." "Did you hurt yourself?" James asked Ethan directly. "Like, did you fall down or something?" Ethan shook his head, staring down at his pizza. "Then why won't you sit?" Michael pressed. "Are you scared of chairs?" More laughter erupted around the table. Ethan's face flushed red. His hands trembled, making the milk carton wobble on his tray. "I said leave him alone," Lily shouted, standing up. "You're being mean." Hey, what's going on here?" Mrs. Patterson, the lunch monitor, hurried over to the table. "Why is everyone yelling?" "Ethan won't sit down," James announced. "He's been standing all day, and it's weird." Mrs. Patterson looked at Ethan with concern. "Sweetheart, are you feeling okay? Do you have a stomachache? Do you need to see Nurse Williams?" "I'm fine," Ethan whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Then you need to sit down, honey. Those are the cafeteria rules. Everyone sits while they eat. I can't, Ethan said, his voice breaking. Why not? Mrs. Patterson asked, her tone softening at the distress on his face. I just can't, he said, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. Sarah, who had been observing from her monitoring position near the lunch line, couldn't take it anymore. She walked over quickly. Mrs. Patterson, may I speak with you for a moment? They stepped a few feet away from the table, though Sarah kept Ethan in her line of sight. Something's not right, Sarah said quietly. He's been refusing to sit all morning, every single time. I've never seen anything like it. Do you think it's behavioral? Mrs. Patterson asked. Like oppositional defiance or something? No, Sarah said firmly. This isn't defiance. This is something else. Look at him. They both turned to watch Ethan, who still stood at the table, his shoulders shaking slightly, fighting back tears while the other children stared at him. He's terrified, Sarah continued, but I don't know of what. Should we call his parents? Mrs. Patterson suggested. His file says he lives with his uncle, Sarah said. I'll try calling after lunch, but right now I think we need to let him stand. Forcing him is only making it worse. Mrs. Patterson nodded reluctantly. All right, but if this continues, we're going to need to involve the principal. Sarah returned to Ethan's table. Ethan, it's okay. You can stand if you need to. Just try to eat something, okay? He nodded miserably, picking up his pizza with shaking hands. He took one small bite, chewed mechanically, then set it back down. He didn't touch the rest of his lunch. The afternoon was more of the same. During art class, Ethan stood at the craft table while creating his autumn leaf collage. During independent reading, he stood beside the beanbag chairs in the library corner while the other children lounged comfortably with their books. During recess, Sarah watched through the window as Ethan stood alone by the fence while the other children ran and played. By the time the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Sarah's concern had transformed into certainty. Something was very wrong. As the children filed out to the buses, Sarah stopped Ethan. Hey, can you hang back for just a minute? I want to talk to you about something. Fear flashed across his face. Am I in trouble? No, sweetie, not at all, Sarah assured him quickly. I just want to check in with you. The other children streamed past them, calling out goodbyes, their voices fading as they headed toward the buses. Within minutes, the classroom was empty except for Sarah and Ethan. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting everything in a golden light that felt surreal given the heavy tension in the room. Sarah pulled a chair over and sat down, deliberately positioning herself at Ethan's eye level rather than towering over him. Ethan, I noticed something today. You didn't sit down. Not once. Not during story time. Not during class. Not even at lunch. He stared at his shoes, silent. I'm not upset with you, Sarah continued gently, but I'm worried about you. And when I'm worried about one of my students, I want to help. Can you tell me why you don't want to sit? I told you, he mumbled. I like standing. Ethan, look at me, please. She waited until his eyes reluctantly met hers. I've been teaching for a long time, and I can tell when someone is uncomfortable. You're not choosing to stand because you like it. You're standing because sitting hurts you. Am I right? His eyes widened and fresh tears spilled over. His lower lip trembled. Please don't make me sit, he whispered. Please, Miss Harper, it hurts too much. Sarah's heart clenched. What hurts, honey? Did you fall? Did you hurt your back? He shook his head frantically. I can't tell you. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. Ethan, if someone is hurting you, you can tell me. I promise I'll help you. That's my job, to keep you safe. You don't understand, he said, his voice rising with panic. I can't. He said if I told anyone, he'd... He stopped abruptly, his hand flying to his mouth as if he could shove the words back in. "He'd what?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "Who said this, Ethan?" But the boy had shut down completely. He backed away from her, shaking his head violently. "I have to go. My bus. I'll miss my bus." "Ethan, wait." But he was already running out the door, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders as he fled down the hallway. Sarah sat frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Then she grabbed her phone and pulled up the school directory. She found the principal's number and called. "Margaret Chen's office," came the secretary's voice. "Hi, this is Sarah Harper. Is Principal Chen available? I need to speak with her urgently." "She's in a meeting, but—" "Tell her it's about a student I believe may be in danger." There was a pause. "Hold, please." 30 seconds later, Principal Chen's voice came on the line. "Sarah? What's going on?" Sarah explained everything, her words tumbling out in a rush. The refusal to sit, the fear in Ethan's eyes, the way he'd flinched when touched, the cryptic statement about someone telling him not to tell. "I'll pull his file," Principal Chen said immediately. "Come to my office. We need to talk about this." 10 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Principal Chen, who had Ethan Miller's enrollment files spread across her desk. Margaret Chen was in her 50s, a no-nonsense administrator who'd been principal at Jefferson Elementary for 15 years. She took child welfare seriously, and her face was grim as she reviewed the paperwork. "Ethan enrolled 3 days ago," Margaret said. "Transferred from Springfield, lives at 247 Oak Street with his legal guardian, Robert Miller. That's his uncle, his mother's brother. According to the emergency contact form, Ethan's mother died in a car accident 6 months ago. His father isn't in the picture, hasn't been since Ethan was a baby." "So this uncle has full custody?" Sarah asked. "Temporary guardianship, according to this," Margaret said, tapping a document. "It's supposed to be reviewed by family court next month." She looked up at Sarah. "What exactly did he say to you?" "He said someone told him not to tell anyone, and that if he did, something bad would happen." He didn't finish the sentence. "He ran out before I could get more information." Margaret leaned back in her chair, her expression troubled. "You understand what you're suggesting here?" "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But Margaret, I've taught hundreds of children. I know the difference between a kid being stubborn and a kid being hurt. This child is hurting. Physical pain? You're sure?" "I'm sure. The way he moves, the way he winces when he shifts his weight, the absolute refusal to put any pressure on his backside. Margaret, I think someone is hitting him. And given his reaction when I asked about it, I think it's his uncle." Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. "I'm calling CPS. We're mandated reporters, and this meets the threshold for suspected abuse." While Margaret made the call, Sarah sat with her hands clenched in her lap, replaying every interaction she'd had with Ethan over the past 3 days. Had there been signs earlier that she'd missed? On his first day, he'd been quiet but had sat normally. On his second day, she now recalled, he'd shifted in his seat frequently, as if uncomfortable. And today, the third day, he'd refused entirely. Whatever was happening to him, it was escalating. Margaret finished her call. "They're sending someone out tomorrow morning to interview Ethan at school. They'll also do a home visit. In the meantime, we document everything. Write down every observation you've made, every conversation you've had with him. Times, dates, specific behaviors." "What do we do if he comes to school tomorrow and he's worse?" Sarah asked. "Then we call them immediately, and we call the police," Margaret said firmly. "Sarah, you did the right thing bringing this to me. We're going to help this child." But that night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Ethan standing alone in her classroom, his small body braced against pain he couldn't explain, protecting someone who was hurting him. She thought about her own childhood, about her parents who'd loved her, protected her, kept her safe. She thought about the trust children placed in adults and how devastating it was when that trust was violated. At 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and made herself tea. She sat at her kitchen table and wrote down everything she could remember about Ethan's behavior, filling 3 pages with observations. The way he held himself, the oversized clothes that seemed designed to hide something, the fear in his eyes, the desperate, "Please don't make me sit." Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of day that matched Sarah's mood. She arrived at school early, her stomach in knots. Would Ethan even come today? Would his uncle sense that something was wrong and keep him home? But at 8:45, Ethan walked through her classroom door. He was wearing the same oversized sweatshirt, and his face was pale and drawn, as if he hadn't slept either. He didn't make eye contact with Sarah as he headed to his desk. "Good morning, Ethan," Sarah said carefully. He mumbled something that might have been a greeting and remained standing beside his desk. During morning announcements, while the other children sat at their desks, Ethan stood. During spelling practice, he stood. And when story time came around, Sarah's heart broke as she watched him take up his position at the back of the group, standing motionless while the others settled onto the carpet. But today she noticed more details. The way he kept reaching back with his left hand, as if to touch his lower back, then stopping himself. The way he shifted his weight from foot to foot, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. The way his eyes were glassy with unshed tears. At 10:30, Principal Chen appeared in the doorway and caught Sarah's eye. She nodded almost imperceptibly. The CPS worker was here. "Class, I need you to work quietly on your reading worksheets for a few minutes," Sarah announced. "I'll be right back." In the hallway, Principal Chen stood with a woman in her late 30s carrying a briefcase. "Sarah, this is Nicole Rodriguez from Child Protective Services." "Miss Harper," Nicole said, shaking her hand. "Principal Chen briefed me on your concerns. I'd like to speak with Ethan, if that's all right. Is there a private space we can use?" "The counseling office," Margaret said. "Follow me." Sarah returned to her classroom, her heart pounding. She watched as Margaret appeared in her doorway a moment later. "Ethan," Margaret said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can you come with me for a few minutes? There's someone who'd like to meet you." Ethan's face went white. "Why? What did I do?" "Nothing wrong, sweetie," Margaret assured him. "She just wants to talk to you about how you're settling in at your new school." He looked at Sarah, his eyes pleading. Sarah gave him what she hoped was an encouraging smile. "It's okay, Ethan. Go ahead." He walked out of the classroom like a man walking to his execution, his steps slow and heavy. The next 40 minutes were the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to focus on her students, helping Emma with her reading, correcting Tyler's math. But her mind was down the hall in that office. What was Ethan telling them? Was he telling them anything? Or was he too scared? When he finally returned to the classroom, his eyes were red and swollen from crying. He didn't look at anyone, just walked straight to his desk and stood there, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but she knew she needed to let him have space. The other children stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern, but no one said anything. At lunchtime, Principal Chen called Sarah out into the hallway again. "They're taking him to the hospital for an examination," Margaret said quietly. "Nicole saw enough to warrant immediate action. She's calling the police right now." "What did he tell her?" Sarah asked. "I don't know the details. But Nicole's been doing this for 20 years, and she looked shaken when she came out of that room." "Is he going back to his uncle's house?" "Not tonight. Emergency protective custody. They're placing him with a foster family while they investigate. Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. Thank God. You saved that child, Margaret said, gripping her shoulder. You saw what others might have missed, and you acted on it. That took courage. But Sarah didn't feel courageous. She felt sick, because if she'd saved him, it meant there had been something to save him from. It meant her worst suspicions had been correct. An hour later, Sarah stood in her classroom doorway and watched as Nicole Rodriguez walked Ethan down the hallway toward the main entrance. He carried his backpack and a plastic bag containing his lunch. He looked smaller than ever, a tiny figure dwarfed by the adult beside him. As they passed Sarah's room, Ethan turned his head and looked at her. Their eyes met for just a second, and Sarah saw something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Betrayal? Relief? Fear? Maybe all three. She raised her hand in a small wave. He didn't wave back. Then he was gone, disappearing through the double doors into whatever came next. Sarah returned to her classroom where 22 children waited, their faces full of questions she couldn't answer. Is Ethan okay? Lily asked. He was crying. Where did he go? Marcus wanted to know. Is he coming back? Ethan had to leave early today, Sarah said, choosing her words carefully. But I want you all to know that he's safe, and people who care about him are making sure he's taken care of. That's all I can tell you right now. Did someone hurt him? Lily pressed. Is that why he wouldn't sit down? The other children fell silent, waiting for her answer. Sarah took a deep breath. Sometimes kids go through things that are hard, she said slowly, and sometimes adults need to help. The most important thing you can do when someone is going through a hard time is to be kind, to not make fun of them, to not ask them questions that might make them uncomfortable. Can you all promise me that? 22 heads nodded solemnly. Good, Sarah said. Now, let's talk about our science project. But her mind was elsewhere. It was in a hospital room where Ethan was probably being examined. It was in a police station where officers were probably preparing to question Robert Miller. It was in a courtroom where a judge would decide Ethan's future. The rest of the day crawled by. When the final bell rang, Sarah collapsed into her desk chair and let out a long, shaky breath. Her phone buzzed with a text from Principal Chen. Update when you're free. My office. Sarah grabbed her bag and headed down the hallway. Margaret's door was open, and she was sitting behind her desk with a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold hours ago. Close the door, Margaret said. Sarah did, then sat down. What happened? The hospital examination confirmed severe bruising, consistent with repeated physical abuse, Margaret said, her voice tight with anger. Belt marks across his lower back and buttocks, some fresh from yesterday or the day before, some older, partially healed. The doctor said he's been suffering this for at least several weeks, possibly months. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She swallowed hard, pressing her hand against her mouth. The police arrested Robert Miller an hour ago, Margaret continued. He's being charged with multiple counts of child abuse. They searched the house and found evidence, including the belt he'd been using. Oh my God, Sarah whispered. When they confronted him, he initially denied everything. Then he claimed Ethan was a difficult child who needed discipline. Then he broke down and admitted he'd been under stress since his sister died, that taking in Ethan had been overwhelming, that he'd lost his temper. Lost his temper, Sarah repeated bitterly. Is that what we're calling child abuse now? The DA is pushing for the maximum sentence, Margaret said, and Ethan won't be going back to that house. CPS is working on finding family members who might be suitable guardians. Apparently, there's a grandmother in Florida who's already reached out. How is he? Sarah asked. Did anyone say how Ethan is doing? Scared, confused, but also, according to Nicole, relieved. She said once he started talking, everything came out. How his uncle had been hitting him for months. How it had started with spankings but escalated to beatings with a belt. How he'd been threatened that if he told anyone, it would get worse. How he'd been standing at school because sitting hurt too much. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. She didn't bother wiping them away. He also said something else, Margaret added quietly. He said he knew you figured it out. He said he saw it in your eyes when you asked him about it yesterday. He said he was glad you didn't give up on him. Sarah's throat was too tight to speak. She just nodded. Go home, Margaret said gently. Get some rest. This has been a hell of a day. But when Sarah got home, she couldn't rest. She couldn't eat. She couldn't focus on anything. She kept seeing Ethan's face. Kept hearing his small voice saying, please don't make me sit. Kept thinking about all the ways this could have gone differently if she hadn't paid attention, if she hadn't pushed, if she hadn't cared enough to look beyond the surface. That night, she called her mother, something she hadn't done in weeks. Sarah, is everything okay? Her mother answered, concern immediate in her voice. And Sarah broke down. She told her mother everything, the words pouring out between sobs. Her mother listened, didn't interrupt, just let her daughter process the trauma of the day. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, her mother said when Sarah finally fell silent. You saw a child in trouble and you helped him. You might have saved his life. But what if I'd missed it? Sarah asked. What if I just thought he was being difficult? But you didn't miss it. You trusted your instincts. That's what makes you a good teacher. After they hung up, Sarah made herself tea and sat by the window, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. She thought about all the children in all the classrooms across the country, wondered how many of them were suffering in silence, wondered how many teachers were missing the signs. Thursday morning came too soon. Sarah dragged herself out of bed, showered, dressed, and drove to school on autopilot. When she walked into her classroom, she found a note on her desk from Principal Chen. Ethan is with his foster family. They seem nice. He's safe. The words, he's safe, hit her like a physical force. She sank into her chair and let herself cry again, this time with relief. Her students arrived, subdued and quiet. They all noticed Ethan's empty desk. Some of them stared at it. Some of them asked questions Sarah couldn't answer. But they were gentler with each other that day, kinder, as if Ethan's absence had taught them something about compassion. During story time, when the children gathered on the carpet, Marcus left a space open where Ethan had stood the day before. It was a small gesture, but it made Sarah's eyes burn with fresh tears. Ms. Harper, Lily raised her hand. Can we make something for Ethan? Like a card or something, so he knows we're thinking about him? Sarah smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in 2 days. I think that's a wonderful idea. They spent art time that afternoon making cards. 22 children poured their hearts into paper and markers, drawing pictures, writing messages, decorating with stickers and glitter. We miss you. Hope you feel better soon. Come back when you can. You're brave. Sarah collected them all, promising to make sure Ethan received them. She didn't know if she'd be allowed to contact him directly, but she'd find a way. Those cards represented something important, evidence that people cared, that his classmates hadn't forgotten him, that he mattered. Friday afternoon, Sarah received a call from Nicole Rodriguez. I thought you'd want to know, Nicole said. Ethan's grandmother arrived from Florida yesterday. She's taking custody of him. She had no idea what her son had been doing. She's devastated, furious, and absolutely determined to give Ethan the home he deserves. That's wonderful, Sarah said, genuine relief flooding through her. She wants to meet you, Nicole continued. She said Ethan told her about his teacher who figured out what was happening. She wants to thank you in person. Would you be open to that? Of course, Sarah said immediately, whenever works for them. How about next week? We're still in the process of getting Ethan transitioned, but she's eager to connect with people who helped him. They arranged to meet on Tuesday afternoon at a neutral location, a family services office downtown. Sarah spent the weekend anxious and uncertain about what she'd say, how she'd explain her role in all of this. Tuesday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling. Sarah drove to the address Nicole had given her, parked, and sat in her car for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she walked inside. Nicole met her in the lobby. She's in conference room B. Ready? Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. Nicole led her down a hallway and opened a door. Inside, sitting at a table, was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. And beside her, looking small but significantly better than the last time Sarah had seen him, was Ethan. "Miss Harper!" Ethan jumped up from his chair, and before Sarah could process what was happening, he was hugging her, his small arms wrapped tight around her waist. She knelt down and hugged him back, tears streaming down her face. "Hi, sweetie. I'm so glad to see you." "This is my grandma," Ethan said, pulling back to look at her. His eyes were still sad, still haunted, but there was something new there too. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of healing. "Thank you," the grandmother said, standing and extending her hand. Her voice shook with emotion. "Thank you for saving my grandson. Nicole told me everything. If you hadn't noticed, if you hadn't acted—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm just glad he's safe now," Sarah said, shaking her hand. They sat down, and for the next hour they talked. The grandmother, whose name was Patricia, explained that she'd had no idea what her son had been doing. She lived in Florida and had limited contact with Robert after her daughter's death, dealing with her own grief. When CPS contacted her and explained the situation, she'd immediately made arrangements to take custody. "He's coming to live with me in Florida," Patricia said. "We're leaving next week. Fresh start, new school, new life." Sarah's heart sank at the thought of Ethan leaving, but she knew it was what he needed. "That sounds perfect. I brought you something," Ethan said suddenly. He reached into a backpack at his feet and pulled out a drawing. It showed a stick figure woman with brown hair standing next to a smaller stick figure boy. Above them, he'd written in careful letters, "Miss Harper saved me. She is the best teacher." Sarah took the drawing with trembling hands. "Ethan, this is beautiful. Thank you." "You didn't give up on me," he said simply, "even when I wouldn't tell you what was wrong. You knew anyway." "I'm so proud of you for being brave," Sarah told him. "What happened to you wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault." "That's what the doctor said too," Ethan replied, "and the police lady, and Grandma. Everyone keeps saying that." "That's because it's true," Patricia added firmly, putting her arm around her grandson. "What my son did was wrong, period, and Ethan is not responsible for any of it." They talked for another 20 minutes, and Sarah watched as Ethan slowly relaxed, leaning against his grandmother, occasionally smiling at something she said. He was still healing, still processing, but he was on the right path now. He had someone who loved him, who would protect him, who would help him recover. When it was time to leave, Ethan hugged Sarah one more time. "Will I ever see you again?" "I hope so," Sarah said honestly. "But even if we don't see each other for a while, I want you to know that I'll always remember you, and I'll always be proud of how strong you were." "Can I write to you?" he asked. "From Florida?" "I would love that," Sarah said, smiling through her tears. Patricia gave Sarah her contact information, and they promised to stay in touch. As Sarah watched them leave, Ethan turning to wave at her one last time before disappearing through the doors, she felt a mixture of grief and relief so powerful it nearly knocked her off her feet. Nicole walked Sarah back to the lobby. You know, Nicole said, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen hundreds of cases, and I can tell you that most of the time, abuse goes undetected for far too long. Teachers see kids every day, but they're busy, they're overwhelmed, they miss the signs. You didn't miss them. You saw a child refusing to sit, and instead of getting frustrated or dismissing it, you paid attention. That's rare. I just did what anyone would do, Sarah said quietly. No, Nicole said firmly. That's not true. A lot of people wouldn't have noticed. A lot of people would have noticed but wouldn't have acted. You did both. You trusted your instincts, you documented everything. You followed protocol. You saved that child from months or even years of continued abuse. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. One more thing, Nicole added. Robert Miller had a history. This wasn't his first time. There were complaints at his previous address, but nothing was ever substantiated. If you hadn't acted when you did, who knows how much worse it could have gotten. That information haunted Sarah on the drive home. A history. Previous complaints. The system had failed Ethan before she'd even met him. How many other children were falling through the cracks right now, in classrooms across the country, suffering in silence? Over the weekend, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. On Sunday evening, she sat down at her computer and started writing. She wrote about Ethan, about the signs she'd noticed, about the importance of paying attention. She wrote about mandated reporting, about trusting your instincts, about the responsibility educators had to protect their students. She published it on her personal blog, not expecting much response. But by Monday morning, it had been shared 300 times. By Tuesday, over 2,000. Teachers from across the country were commenting, sharing their own stories, thanking her for raising awareness. One comment in particular stuck with her. I had a student last year who always wore long sleeves, even in summer. I wondered about it, but never asked. After reading your story, I'm going to pay more attention. Thank you for the reminder that our job isn't just to teach reading and math. It's to protect our kids. That's when Sarah realized this story was bigger than just Ethan. It was about every child who suffered in silence, every teacher who had the power to help, but needed to be reminded to look closer, to trust their instincts, to act even when it felt uncomfortable. The following week, Principal Chen called Sarah into her office. The district superintendent wants to meet with you, Margaret said. They want to use this case as a training opportunity. They want you to speak at the next district-wide professional development day about recognizing signs of abuse. Me? Sarah asked, surprised. I'm not an expert. No, but you're a teacher who saved a child's life, Margaret said. That makes you exactly the right person to speak about this. So, the next month, Sarah stood in front of 400 teachers and administrators from her district and told Ethan's story. She talked about the small signs she'd noticed, the refusal to sit, the oversized clothing, the flinching at touch, the fear in his eyes. She talked about how easy it would have been to dismiss it as behavioral issues or stubbornness. She talked about trusting her gut, even when she didn't have all the answers. We see our students every single day, she told the audience. Sometimes we see them more than their own parents do. We're in a unique position to notice when something is wrong. But noticing isn't enough. We have to act. We have to make the call, file the report, ask the hard questions. Because for some kids, we might be their only chance. The room was silent when she finished. Then, one by one, people stood up, applauding. Sarah saw tears on many faces. Several teachers approached her afterward to share their own experiences, their own near misses, their own regrets about signs they'd missed. One teacher, an older woman who'd been teaching for 30 years, gripped Sarah's hand and said, 20 years ago, I had a student like Ethan. I noticed things were off, but I didn't act. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I might be wrong, that I didn't want to cause trouble. That child ended up in the hospital 3 months later with severe injuries. I've carried that guilt ever since. Thank you for doing what I didn't do." Sarah hugged her, both of them crying. "It's never too late to start paying attention," Sarah said. "There's always another child who needs us." Meanwhile, in Florida, Ethan was settling into his new life. Patricia enrolled him in a small elementary school near her home. She'd been up front with the principal and his new teacher about his history, wanting to make sure they understood he might need extra support. His new teacher, Mrs. Thompson, was a gentlewoman in her 40s who specialized in trauma-informed teaching. She made sure Ethan had options in the classroom, including a standing desk, a wobble stool, and regular chairs. She never forced him to do anything that made him uncomfortable. She gave him space to heal while also providing structure and consistency. The first week was rough. Ethan barely spoke. He stood at the back of the classroom during lessons. He ate lunch alone. But slowly, gradually, things began to change. By the second week, he'd made a friend, a boy named Carlos who shared his love of dinosaurs. By the third week, he'd volunteered to read aloud during literacy time. By the fourth week, he'd sat down in a chair for the first time without being asked. Patricia called Sarah to tell her. "He just sat down," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Like it was the most natural thing in the world. No hesitation, no pain. He's healing, Sarah. Your intervention gave him the chance to heal." Sarah received letters from Ethan every few weeks. They were simple, childlike letters full of details about his new school, his new friends, his grandmother's cooking. But occasionally, he'd write something that revealed deeper healing. "I'm not scared anymore. I don't have nightmares as much now. Grandma says I'm safe forever." Those letters went into a special box Sarah kept in her classroom, a reminder of why she did this job, why it mattered, why paying attention to the small things could change everything. 4 months after Ethan left, Sarah's class got a new student. Her name was Maya, and she was quiet, withdrawn. During the first week, Sarah noticed she flinched when people raised their voices. She wore long sleeves despite the warm weather. She picked at her lunch but rarely ate. The old Sarah might have given her time to adjust, might have chalked it up to being new. But the new Sarah, the Sarah who'd learned from Ethan, paid closer attention. She documented behaviors. She talked to the school counselor. She called home and had a conversation with Maya's father that left her with more questions than answers. By the end of the second week, Sarah had filed a report with CPS. By the end of the third week, Maya had been removed from her home and placed with her aunt. And by the end of the first month, Maya was smiling again, eating lunch with friends, raising her hand in class. Sarah never took credit for these interventions. She always said she was just doing her job. But Principal Chen knew better. She'd put Sarah's name forward for the district's Teacher of Excellence Award, and when Sarah won it at the end of the year, the entire school celebrated. At the award ceremony, Sarah gave a short speech. "I didn't win this for my teaching skills," she said honestly. "I won this because I paid attention to a child who was suffering. And that's not special. That's the bare minimum of what we should all be doing. Every teacher in this room has the power to change a child's life. Every single one of you. You just have to be willing to look beyond the surface, to trust your instincts, and to act even when it's uncomfortable." That summer, Sarah received a package in the mail. Inside was a photo of Ethan standing on a beach in Florida, his arms spread wide, his face turned toward the sun. He was smiling, genuinely smiling, his entire body relaxed in a way Sarah had never seen during those 3 days in her classroom. On the back of the photo, Patricia had written, "He asked me to send this to you. He wanted you to see how far he's come. We'll never be able to thank you enough for giving him this chance at a real childhood. You didn't just notice he was hurting. You cared enough to help. That changed everything. Sarah put the photo on her desk where she could see it every day. It became her touchstone, her reminder during the difficult days when teaching felt overwhelming and thankless. She'd look at that photo of Ethan on the beach and remember that sometimes one moment of paying attention could alter the entire trajectory of a child's life. The next school year started with a new group of students, new faces, new personalities, new challenges. But Sarah approached it differently now. She watched her students more carefully, looking for the small signs, the subtle indicators that something might be wrong. She asked more questions. She trusted her instincts more readily, and she made sure her students knew from day one that her classroom was a safe place. During the first week of school, she gathered her new second graders on the carpet for story time. As they settled in, she noticed one girl, a tiny thing with braids, standing at the back of the group. "Sweetie, would you like to sit with us?" Sarah asked gently. The girl shook her head. "I like standing." And Sarah's heart skipped a beat. But this time she didn't wait. This time she knew exactly what to do. After story time, she called the girl over. "Can I ask you something? Does it hurt when you sit down?" The girl's eyes went wide, then filled with tears, and she nodded. Sarah knelt down to her level. "Okay, sweetheart, you don't have to sit if it hurts. But I need you to know that if someone is hurting you, I can help. I will help. Do you understand?" The girl nodded again, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What's your name?" Sarah asked softly. "Emma," the girl whispered. "Emma, I'm going to make sure you're safe, I promise. Can you trust me to help you?" Emma looked into Sarah's eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have given her courage, because she nodded one more time and whispered, "Yes." Sarah made the call to CPS before lunch. By the end of the day, Emma was being interviewed. By the end of the week, she was placed with a foster family. And Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she'd done it again. She'd saved another child. But this time it hadn't taken 3 days. It had taken 3 hours. Because Sarah had learned from Ethan. She'd learned to recognize the signs immediately, to trust her instincts without hesitation, to act quickly and decisively. Over the years that followed, Sarah would help identify and report 6 more cases of child abuse or neglect. Some were as obvious as Emma, others were more subtle, buried beneath layers of secrecy and fear. But Sarah found them all because she never stopped paying attention. She became known in her district as the teacher who saw things others missed. New teachers would come to her for advice. Administrators would consult her when they had concerns about a student. Parents would specifically request her class because they knew their children would be safe with her. But Sarah never forgot where it started. She never forgot those 3 days in September when a small boy refused to sit down and she chose to pay attention instead of looking away. She never forgot the fear in Ethan's eyes or the relief when he finally felt safe enough to tell the truth. 10 years after that week in September, Sarah received an email that made her stop breathing. The subject line read, "From Ethan Miller." With shaking hands, she opened it. "Dear Miss Harper," it began, "you probably don't remember me. I was in your second grade class for 3 days, 10 years ago. I'm 17 now, a senior in high school. I'm writing to tell you that I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I'm thriving. I live with my grandmother in Florida. I'm planning to study social work in college. I want to help kids like me, kids who are suffering and don't know how to ask for help. I wanted you to know that what you did for me, noticing when I couldn't sit down and caring enough to find out why, that changed my life. You saved me, and because you saved me, I'm going to spend my life saving others. Thank you will never be enough, but thank you anyway. I hope you're still teaching, still paying attention, still saving kids. The world needs more teachers like you. With gratitude and love, Ethan." Sarah read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she printed it out and added it to the box with Ethan's letters and the photo of him on the beach. It was evidence that paying attention mattered, that trusting your instincts mattered, that one teacher could make a difference in ways that rippled out for years, decades, maybe even generations. Because Ethan would become a social worker. He would save other children, and those children would grow up and make their own difference in the world. All because one teacher noticed a child refusing to sit down and chose to care about why. That evening, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror and looked at herself. She was older now, grayer, more tired. Teaching for 21 years had left its mark. But she was proud of those marks, proud of the life she'd chosen, proud of the difference she'd made. She thought about all the children she'd taught, all the lives she'd touched. Some of them she'd simply educated. But some of them, the ones like Ethan and Emma and the others, she'd saved. And that made every difficult day, every frustrating moment, every doubt about whether she was making a difference, completely worth it. The next morning, Sarah walked into her classroom to greet her new group of second graders. 24 faces looked up at her, some excited, some nervous, some shy. And Sarah looked back at each one of them, really looked, paying attention to the small details that others might miss. Because somewhere in that classroom, there might be a child who was suffering in silence. A child who needed someone to notice, someone to care, someone to act. And if that child existed, Sarah would find them. She would help them. She would save them. That was her job. Not just to teach reading and math and science, but to protect the vulnerable, to give voice to the voiceless, to be the safe adult that every child deserved. It started with paying attention. It started with trusting your instincts. It started with refusing to look away when something felt wrong. And it started with understanding that sometimes the smallest behavior, something as simple as a child refusing to sit down, could be a cry for help that only those paying close attention would hear. Sarah began her morning routine, writing the date on the board, organizing her materials, preparing for the day ahead. But she never stopped watching her students, never stopped paying attention, never stopped caring. Because that's what teachers do, the good ones anyway. They don't just educate, they protect, they save, they change lives. And Sarah Harper would spend the rest of her career doing exactly that. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power we all have to make a difference in a child's life, we encourage you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others who need to hear this message. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when someone paid attention to you when you needed it most, or when you noticed something that others missed. Your story might inspire someone else to pay closer attention, to trust their instincts, to act when they see a child in need. Together, we can create a world where no child suffers in silence, where every cry for help is heard, and where every vulnerable child has at least one adult who cares enough to notice, to act, to save them. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply paying attention. Thank you for watching, and remember, you have the power to change a life. Use it.